Hello, internets. This is Mark Gramling. Welcome to our Friday Onco Data Podcast. I'm the VP of Oncology at LARVOL. And today, I'm super excited to have Matt Lewis joining me. I guess we've known each other a couple years back, maybe 3 or 4 years, but I don't think been able to see or talk to you in maybe a couple years. So the best way to be introduced is on a live podcast because that's what you do in 2025. So we're going to be talking about some different applications, AI focused, as we often do on this podcast. Maybe a little oncology, maybe a little non-oncology, because we don't discriminate. But I think Matt would do a better job introducing himself to the audience if you would oblige me, Matt, with an intro.
Yeah, sure, Mark. Thanks so much for having me on. Really appreciate it, and it's really good to see you again after a couple of years. And of course, thanks to the audience for their time for being here. Just a little bit about me. I've been in healthcare and life sciences my whole career, 27 years. A bit of time on the kind of professional medical side. I worked in patient advocacy, actually in cancer. I was at a cancer patient advocacy group for adults with young adults with cancer. Still work in that space a bit. My wife works at the Sloan Kettering Cancer Center here in New York, so very close to my heart. I most of my time though was on the kind of commercial side and analytics. I started at AbbVie, worked in medical affairs for 24 years as a medical liaison in publications, CME, trials, conferences, advisory boards, you name it, I did it. And then switched on to the consulting / agency side, ran large teams globally, and in 2015 started the advanced analytics and medical affairs consulting group at Inizio, grew that team across many kind of services and solutions and software and everything that starts with an S, and was promoted to chief AI officer in 2022. Helped to kind of upskill and transform both our internal group as well as external partners and clients with generative AI. Left Inizio about 7 months ago to take this company Elemental out of stealth and really just with a focus on augmenting mental wellness. So again, happy to be here and looking forward to our conversation.
Absolutely. I appreciate that intro, Matt. With that broad a swath, sometimes I wasn't sure how to set up the conversation.
Yeah.
That's a broad swath of, especially with your extensive experience in AI. I guess maybe one way to sort of think of things is sometimes I don't think we're myopic, but we're sort of very in different places with what we're doing with Glenn, and maybe a lot what you've been applying in your long experience, especially in medical affairs, and then over on the agency side. So it's almost like a mental exercise. So one thing I was thinking about is one thing that we're building a lot with Glenn, as listeners to the podcast know, is doing our best to apply large language models to our social media universe that's in Clinton. So we look at about 5,000 oncologists and see how they're reacting to data disclosures. And it's relatively straightforward, but I guess it wouldn't have been thought of as straightforward 2 years ago to assign sentiment using AI to how oncologists are reacting to data releases. But I guess from that setup, I was wondering what maybe you react to or connect closest to that pursuit of us on a different side. You mentioned patient advocacy. So where do you think that type of technology in looking at sentiment, maybe especially from HCPs, could apply, or where you've seen it best apply from your experience, Matt? That was a very broad question, but I hope that
No,
was not too much exposition.
no. I think it's a great question, and it is a really kind of very aligned use case, both to the space at large as well as to LARVOL and where you guys have real expertise and leadership in the space. And I think it is one of the real kind of truism for generative AI strategy that it's often the problems that have existed the longest in the space that are the best examples of where solutioning makes sense. And I think this is one of those examples where I can even think back to projects that we did, even 12, 14, 17 years ago that had this exact problem that were, essentially back in the day hard coded or manually coded to try to do a lot of what you're describing. That took many man hours to, individually using, ethnographic and qualitative approaches, grounded theory, to try to go into individual responses, at live conferences or advisory boards, voice of customer, market research, and try to say, oh, did Dr. Gramling, when he said X, did he really mean this other thing? And is it in this topical area, this thematic space? Or did he really mean this other thing related to our message platform? And we would have teams of people going in literally with reams of paper trying to
Mhm.
kind of code and mark what we thought we heard and what was actually aligned to our messaging, so that we could figure out what our advocates, in this case professional advocates, really kind of believed related to our messaging. Were they antagonistic? Were they advocates? Were they supporting? Were they kind of resisting? And how can we think about progressing them forward in the message pillar? And then later, when Twitter, now X, kind of came out, there were some simple techniques to kind of think about what people were posting and what they shared out, and how it was kind of easily accessible, both in the fire hose and indirectly, to think about like what those themes looked like and how to actually kind of port them out easily. But I think this solution that you're talking about is really the natural evolution of that. It's like a way of helping the space more kind of contextually understand the deeper meaning of what's being said in the area. And it's solving a problem that has existed forever, really, in terms of how clinicians and patients and others make sense of technical medical information that ultimately solves a clinical problem. And the reason why this is so important is that there are a number of organizations and people out in the world right now in life sciences that are trying to use AI to solve what might be called like bullshit problems, or like, not real problems that are essentially solvable by AI, but are not really kind of adding real value in the ecosystem. Like, there are things that are easy to do with AI, but they don't really move the innovation ball up the hill. They don't actually help patients that are suffering from cancer or any other disease. So, and it tends to be that these types of things are not problems like the one you're describing that have existed for 10, 15, 20 years, but they're kind of things that all of a sudden became like really sexy and interesting in the last like year and a half. But when you look back at someone's career, they're not things that people really hit their head up against the wall for. They didn't have a lot of friction for most of people's career. It's just all of a sudden someone's like, hey, let's do AI for X. And now they're doing it, but it doesn't, there's no like product market fit. There's no traction in the market because they're not really solving a real problem.
I think I would say for people in the space, but I think it's gone well beyond people in any particular industry now, that affixing AI to company names, to new problems that maybe did exist or didn't exist prior, is something, as all of us are trying to chase down this brand new technology. I can certainly appreciate what you call bullshit problems. I guess I'll get our producer if you need to beep that out here on LinkedIn, but I think we'll be fine. But I definitely appreciate where you're coming from on that, Matt. And it sort of really fits in LARVOL's sort of history as a company. Is, we've always prided ourselves on doing the work that maybe to take it off the hands of some of our healthcare or pharma customers, to take that, beat your head against the wall problem. And now we're applying the AI to, as you described it, that was very much a beat your head against the wall problem dating back 10 years ago. So it really aligns with sort of our history, even though AI is so new. So I appreciate
Yeah,
that.
I mean, just thinking about what you said earlier, also just about sentiment. This is one of those areas also that earlier, pre-generative, there was a lot of consideration in the kind of legacy AI space, especially with machine learning models, other algorithmic models that could be brought to bear. My team at Inizio, a number of years ago, we published some work that the team had built native to try to predict sentiment in the peer-reviewed publication space. And this is one of those things where people publish a lot in certain areas, like in cancer or other chronic illnesses. There's tons of papers and posters out in the space, but it tends to be that the actual valence, the directional sentiment of a particular piece, or even the citations on the piece, tend not to be all that kind of conspicuous. They're not like either tremendously positive or tremendously negative. Most people's commentary in the peer-reviewed literature is fairly agnostic. It's like it kind of sets right in the middle. So if you look at the sentiment scores of most papers, they're fairly neutral. They're near zero. It's something actually less than 8% of all sentiment in the peer-reviewed literature has any valence at all. It's like and of that, maybe about 5 or 6% is negative, and 1 to 2 to 3% is positive. So if you even try to see across, 5,000, 8,000 papers, what's leaning positive versus what's leaning negative, you have to look at a very wide corpus to even get a sense
Mhm.
of kind of what alignment looks like, because most people, when they write and when they get through the peer review process, don't have much of a disposition that's either like overly positive or very concerning. So,
Sure.
and the models, the algorithms earlier were not very sensitive in picking up valence that was very strong or very weak. So now generative is helpful in trying to really kind of surface some signals of what people are really saying when they mean something. If they don't call it out and say, a word that actually means that it's positive, you can see patterns in how they communicate something and indicate that the overall thrust of what they're communicating actually is positive, even if they're not using affective words that mean that it's
Sure.
supportive or that they endorse it, or that it's actually an aligned topic that means that they're actually in an advocate for that topic. And the generative models now, especially the newer models, are better at that than what we had in the past. So even back in 6-7 years ago, if you said cancer in like a social media post, the word cancer to most models would be seen as negative. So they would grade
Yeah.
the sentiment in the post as negative. Even it wasn't negative; they were just literally describing the fact that someone had cancer, and they would grade the post as a negative post. So it wasn't until very recently that you could even kind of qualify the actual tone around the post as either positive or negative, and mention the fact that this is just a acknowledgement, a statement of fact. So things have progressed rapidly in the last couple of years in this space, and I think just there's so much opportunity for where we go from here.
Absolutely. We've seen almost out of the box when we first started building this past couple years, being able to examine something as sophisticated of, you start with it's cancer, that's bad. Well, now the models can can ascertain well the implications of minimal residual disease. Something as complex as a descriptor as that being positive or negative. And I know, we haven't ventured into publication sentiment on our side. We've limited to social, but I know you're very much involved, I guess, amongst other things with ISMPD, one of the associations, in terms of looking at AI and publications. I know we're short on time, but one thing I think about every day from the larval perspective, we use AI for data extraction and using tools to enable us to pull that data that goes into our common data model, and a little bit of consideration in the future about using LLM again to do summaries and things of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess how do I set you up for a question? What would you say is the one most exciting, or you could pick maybe the most troubling trends you're seeing in uses of AI in publications in your space?
Yeah,
That's a tough question, but I figure choose a good one or a bad one. How about that, Matt?
yeah, I could do both really quickly. I mean, the most exciting, I think, is that we're almost at that inflection point where the use of generative to speed time to publication is upon us. Right now you can kind of see in the tech the ability for people to take results from trials and get them to publication, to clinicians, to people with cancer faster than is currently possible. I mean, I went into life sciences 28 years ago because my grandmother died of breast cancer, and for me and a lot of people, it's personal. You want data if someone is coming up with new research to get into the hands of their oncologist faster than is possible. If they discover something today, the average time to publication is 12 to 16 months. If you can shorten that to 4 months or 2 months or 2 days, that's brilliant for everyone. So that is soon upon us as a result of generative. The bad news is because it's so easy now to create content. I'm a peer reviewer for Taylor and Francis, the journals. We are seeing a flood of fake papers that are being submitted into the systems by people that are using these paper mills and kind of separate considerations to write papers for them with no human input whatsoever. And there's no research that they're based on. There's no human touch
Yeah.
to them at all. They're literally 100% written by AI, and there's no scientific fact to them at all. They're just trying to get like citations added to their roster, if you will. And as a peer reviewer, it's overwhelming because you have to spend all the time throttling them out of the system instead of doing the real work of getting actual research through and published. And it's almost crippling. It's like the amount of time spent on pushing out the junk to get the real work through is it's very challenging at this point. So I think the publishing industry is going to need to come to a reckoning in order to allow the great work through while keeping the bad stuff out, and then also speeding time for research that actually affects people's lives.
I guess I guess I need to be more cynical. I didn't sort of fathom people submitting with no input, no basis, no anything whatsoever. That's certainly pretty troubling there. But in
Yeah,
the world of AI, it's always
it's I mean
some up,
it's
some down.
I mean, it's not even just an AI thing. It's really just a human thing because, in most academic environments, as you probably know and appreciate, it's a tenure-based system. So the more papers people have published, the better it is for their academic career. So the system is really, people work towards the rewards and the incentives in the system. So they get more citations. It helps their, publisher perish focus. And if it's easier for them to produce papers, and if it's super easy and super cheap, people do what's in their selfish interests, and it's so intense now. It was really bad 6 months ago, but now it's almost insurmountable.
Oh. Well, hopefully it hopefully it doesn't become more insurmountable, although I don't know if there's a word in the English language for more than insurmountable. But I appreciate that. Well, I tell you what, Matt, since this is the shortest podcast in the history of podcasts, before we conclude, I would just want to give you a chance to, I know you just started a new venture in a new space, more in mental health and wellness. Just wanted to give you a second to not plug your wares, but introduce what your new project is for the audience out of the oncology space, if you don't mind.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to briefly chat about that. So Elemental, we spun out last year. I have a team of amazing co-founders, seasoned healthcare life science executives alongside myself that are kind of building the future of augmented mental wellness. We have two divisions. One division is a software division focused on serious mental illness. We're building product to help people that are suffering from depression, that are getting care from a clinician, but they don't have full response, full remission, full recovery. And with our software, they can get all the way through to recovery using software as an intervention. And then on the other side of the company, the services side, we have a platform called Transfermental. It's a services intervention, like consulting, essentially, where for groups like drug companies, biotech, hospitals, medical groups that are adopting AI solutions, and they're not getting the adoption that they want because people are resisting AI or they're not fully embracing it, if you will. We work with the teams to make sure that they have the right kind of readiness, the emotional well-being, and the interest in the technology to adopt it fully and get the health and the company satisfaction success that they desire. So that's what we're doing.
It's fantastic. Can I call you an AI evangelist in that regard, or is that an appropriate term? Or
Sure,
it's
yeah,
above enthusiast. It's above enthusiast. It's a higher level there, man. I would definitely say that.
I would definitely take that, Mark. I spoke at a conference in Boston like 3 weeks ago, and a guy in the audience who I won't call him out on this podcast, but I was sitting next to him at the podcast. And he knows who he is. He said that someone in his team refers to me as the AI medical affairs Jesus. So I don't know if I should take that as a compliment or how to respond to that. But I like your term better. But that's what he said to me right before I went up and spoke. So I was like, okay, I have this in my head, like right when I'm about to speak to this crowd of executives. But that's probably, I like your evangelist term better, actually.
Well, we'll leave it at that for today with Matt Lewis, our AI in nickname to be inserted by others. If you check him out on social, maybe you can fire him a DM or something with a new suggestion of how to insert the nickname. But
that sounds great.
It was a pleasure, Matt, reconnecting after a couple years. Really appreciate you joining me today to chat. And thanks everybody for listening. Check out Clin, although we talked about way more than Clin today, which was nice, a bit of a change from usual. If you're interested in the Onco Data podcasts, make sure to check us out on all the various social media, and look up Mr. Matt Lewis the same. If you need an AI evangelist or Jesus or head honcho or just all around great guy. Before I come up
Thanks.
with more names, we'll leave it there. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, everyone.